The dry winds of Arizona carried dust across the open plains, each gust whispering stories of battles fought and lives lost. The town had gathered in the square, their eyes fixed on me as though expecting gratitude for their strange reward. Before me stood two young Apache sisters, bound by rope, their faces streaked with dirt yet unbroken in spirit. Their gaze was sharp, filled with suspicion and a fire that chains could not extinguish. The crowd murmured with pride at their offering, believing they had honored me with captives. I felt only a heavy silence in my heart. The sisters did not lower their eyes, even though their hands were tied. Their dark hair fell across their shoulders, tangled from hardship, yet their presence held a kind of dignity few could recognize. The townsfolk spoke of them as spoils, tokens of victory after a long struggle against Apache raiders. To me, they were not trophies, they were human beings, daughters of this land, whose people had defended it long before we claimed it. I saw fear flicker in their faces, but also pride, the kind that survives even in defeat. The memory of the conflict still haunted me, gunfire echoing across canyons, cries of the wounded carried on the wind, and the relentless march of men who believed conquest justified cruelty. I had witnessed men strip others of their dignity, claiming power over bodies and spirits alike. I wanted no part in that legacy. Standing there with the eyes of the town on me, I felt the weight of history pressing down. These sisters were not mine to own. No human being should belong to another. That truth burned within me like desert sun. I stepped forward slowly, ignoring the whispers behind me. My hands reached for the ropes that bound their wrists. The older of the two sisters flinched, unsure of my intention, while the younger stiffened but did not step back. With a firm tug, the knots loosened. The coarse rope fell away, dropping into the dust. The sisters looked at their freed hands in disbelief. A murmur spread through the crowd, of confusion, disapproval, even anger. Still, I stood straight, voice steady as I said, "You are free." Those words cut sharper than any blade. The sisters exchanged a glance, their eyes speaking in silence. Suspicion lingered, and I could not blame them. Too many promises had been broken in this land, too many treaties torn apart like brittle parchment. They did not bow, nor did they thank me. Instead, they simply stepped back, their stance uncertain but unyielding. Freedom was a gift not easily trusted, especially from the hands of those who had once been enemies. Yet something shifted in the air between us, as though an unspoken understanding had taken root, fragile but real. Behind me, the townsfolk began to murmur louder, their disbelief bordering on outrage. Some muttered that I was a fool, that I had wasted a gift that could have served my household, eased my labor, or brought me profit. Others simply shook their heads, calling me soft, but I cared little for their judgment. What they saw as weakness, I knew to be strength. The strength to choose honor over power, to see humanity where others saw property. My conscience was clearer than it had been in years. I turned away from the crowd, leaving them in their noise. The sun blazed overhead, casting long shadows across the town square as I walked. The sisters followed at a distance, their steps cautious, as though uncertain of what came next. I did not look back at first. I wanted them to decide for themselves whether to remain or to go. Freedom meant choice, and choice could not be demanded. Yet I felt their presence lingering behind me, like the echo of a song carried by the wind. Their silence spoke volumes. A hesitation, curiosity, perhaps even the first flicker of trust. That night, under the wide Arizona sky, I sat by the small fire outside my ranch. The air smelled of mesquite smoke, and the coyotes howled in the distance. The sisters remained nearby, though they kept their distance from the flames. They spoke softly to each other in their language, words I could not understand, but their tone carried weight. A debate, worry, perhaps questions about my intentions. I offered them food, simple beans and bread, and though they accepted, their eyes never left mine. I understood. Trust, once broken, is not given freely again. As days turned to weeks, the sisters did not leave. Instead, they began to move more freely around the land, exploring the edges of the ranch and the creek that cut through it. I never demanded their labor, but slowly they began to offer help, fetching water, tending small fires, watching the horses. They worked not as servants, but as equals, their actions voluntary, not compelled. Each gesture was small, but each one built a bridge between us. I realized then that freedom had not only liberated Thama, it had begun to liberate me from my own guilt and silence. The town remained unconvinced. Every trip into the settlement brought whispers, accusing eyes that followed me through the streets. Men called me wasteful, women scoffed at my decision. To them, I had rejected a prize, something they believed I had earned. But when I looked back into the desert and saw the sisters, no longer chained, moving with dignity and purpose, I knew that I had gained far more than they could ever understand. I had chosen a different kind of reward, a one that could not be measured in wealth or status, but in simple humanity. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in red and gold, the older sister approached me directly for the first time. Her voice was steady, though her accent was thick. "Why?" she asked. Just one word, but it carried the weight of every suspicion, every scar, every broken promise. I paused, unsure of how to answer. Finally, I said, "Because freedom belongs to you, not to me. Because this land has seen enough chains." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, her expression unreadable, but her eyes softer than before. The younger sister began to smile more often after that, her laughter faint but genuine when she tended the horses or chased after a stray goat. The older remained guarded, yet her steps grew lighter as days passed. I watched them reclaim pieces of Them's Elvesa sisters in more than blood, bound by survival and resilience. It struck me how easily men could overlook such strength, seeing only captives instead of warriors. They had endured so much, yet still carried themselves with dignity. In their presence, I found myself humbled, reminded of how little I truly understood of freedom's depth. At times, I wondered what the future would hold. Would the sisters remain here, choosing this place as their home, or would they eventually return to their people, disappearing into the wild lands beyond the mountains? I knew the choice would be theirs alone. My role was not to decide their path but to ensure that whichever they chose, it was made in freedom, not in fear. The uncertainty did not trouble me. Instead, it filled me with a quiet peace, knowing I had broken at least one small chain in a world of many. The desert around us bloomed in subtle ways, a cacti flowering in brief bursts of color, the creeks swelling after a rare rainstorm, the nights cooler as the season turned. Life continued, marked by small miracles often overlooked. The sisters and I found a rhythm, not bound by obligation but by shared survival. I realized that I no longer saw them as strangers or burdens. They had become part of this place, threads woven into the fabric of daily life. Freedom, I learned, was not only about untying ropes, it was about creating space for trust to grow. One morning, as I watched the sunrise spill over the horizon, I thought back to that moment in the town square, the ropes falling into the dust, the crowd's anger, the sisters' wary eyes. It had seemed like such a simple choice, yet it had changed everything. In setting them free, I had freed myself from the weight of conquest, from the cycle of possession and power. The land stretched wide before us, endless and untamed, and for the first time, I felt its promise. In their freedom, I had found a deeper truth: none of us truly own this land, or each other. The days blended into a new kind of life, a quieter, steadier, more human. The sisters, once captives, now stood as companions, their presence shaping each moment with unspoken strength. I no longer cared for the whispers of the town or the judgments of men who could not see beyond their greed. All that mattered was the simple fact that I had chosen a path of honor, and in doing so, found something more enduring than power. I had found respect, trust, and the beginnings of peace. That, to me, was the only reward worth having. Days later, I saw the twin sisters again, walking back across the dusty plain toward the ranch. They no longer carried the weight of chains but the dignity of choice. In their hands were bundles of food, roots, dried meat, and herbs I could not name. Without a word, they set them down near the fire pit, as though their offering was a silent contract of respect. I did not ask why they came back, nor did I question their intent. I simply nodded, understanding that freedom had drawn them here, not force or obligation. Their presence became a rhythm in the days that followed. One sister fetched water from the creek, balancing the pail with practiced ease, while the other kept watch at night, her eyes sharp in the darkness. I never told them what to do, yet they've found ways to weave themselves into the work of the ranch. It was not service, it was contribution, chosen freely. That difference changed everything. Slowly, trust was born in small acts, fragile at first but undeniable in its growth. The town, however, did not see it that way. Whispers followed me whenever I passed through the streets. "He wasted them," someone would mutter. "Could have made use," another said with a smirk. Their voices carried the same old hunger for ownership, blind to the value of dignity. I only smiled faintly, keeping my silence, for I had seen something they could not: the fire in the sisters' eyes, the strength in their freedom. Dignity, I realized, can never be wasted. It only multiplies when honored, like water drawn from a deep well. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, the sisters approached me. They stood together, side by side, their posture strong, their voices steady. "You chose honor when others chose power," they said. The words struck deep, cutting through every doubt I had carried. I had thought my choice was for their sake, but now I understood that it was also for mine. In freeing them, I had freed myself from the hunger to control, from the blindness of possession. Their words lingered long after the fire dimmed and the coyotes began to howl. I sat under the stars, replaying their voices in my mind. All my life I had believed freedom was a gift you granted, something given or taken, but the sister showed me that freedom is not mine to offer, it already belongs to every soul. What I had done was not grant them liberty, but recognize it. That realization humbled me more than I cared to admit. They were not my debtors, they were my teachers. The days stretched on, each one carrying the quiet rhythm of survival and companionship. We shared meals by the fire, traded stories in broken words and gestures, and watched the seasons shift. Slowly, the distance between us shrank. The younger sister laughed more often, her joy lightening the silence of the desert nights. The elder remained thoughtful, steady, her eyes carrying centuries of memory. In both of them, I saw resilience stronger than stone, and I began to wonder if perhaps this was the true strength of their people, not in weapons, but in enduring spirit. At the edge of the ranch, the land stretched wild and untamed, a vast horizon that seemed endless. The sisters often stood there at dawn, gazing east as though searching for something beyond my reach. I did not ask what they sought. Some things were not meant to be explained in words. Perhaps they were remembering their family, their people, or the home they had lost. Perhaps they were deciding whether to stay or to leave. Whatever their thoughts, I respected the silence. Freedom meant letting them choose even their dreams without intrusion. The town's judgment never softened. Men would laugh when they saw the sisters walking beside me, whispering insults they thought I could not hear. Some even warned me that they could not be trusted, that blood would turn against me in time. But I ignored them. Fear was the weapon of men who never understood respect. I had chosen my path, and I would not turn back. The sisters had earned my trust through action, through presence, through quiet loyalty not bound by force. That was more than most men in the town could claim. One night, a storm swept across the desert, lightning splitting the sky in furious arcs. The rain came heavy, flooding the creek and threatening the horses. Without hesitation, the sisters worked beside me in the downpour, guiding the animals to safety, their strength unbroken by the storm. When it finally passed, we stood together, drenched but alive, the ranch intact. In that moment, I realized we were no longer three separate paths. We were one, bound not by ownership but by shared survival. Respect had grown into something stronger: unity. In quiet hours, I began to ask myself what lesson the sisters were teaching me. They did not preach or lecture. Instead, they lived their truth with every step, every choice. Freedom was not loud or boastful, it was steady, patient, unshakable. It was in the way they carried themselves, in the fire that no storm could extinguish. Watching them, I learned more about dignity than I ever had from books or sermons. They were not servants in my life, they were mirrors, reflecting the truths I had long ignored. The desert sunsets became a time of reflection for us. We would sit in silence, watching the sky burn and fade into twilight. Sometimes the younger sister would hum softly, a melody foreign to my ears but soothing all the same. The elder would watch the horizon with calm eyes, as though measuring time itself. In those moments, I understood that words were not always necessary. Connection did not need language. It lived in the simple act of sharing space, of breathing the same air, of choosing to remain side by side when you could just as easily walk away. As the weeks turned to months, I noticed that the land itself seemed to accept this new way of life. The crops grew stronger, the horses steadier, the nights less lonely. It was as if harmony had seeped into the soil. Nourished by respect, the sisters became a part of the ranch's soul, their presence woven into its very rhythm. They were no longer outsiders, no longer captives, no longer symbols of war. They were themselves free, proud, alive, and in their freedom, I discovered my own humanity reborn. Sometimes I wondered what their future would hold. Would they remain here, building new roots in the ranch, or would they return to their people, carrying stories of their time in the white man's world? I did not ask, for the choice was theirs alone. I only knew that whatever path they chose, my life had been changed forever. Their presence had stripped me of arrogance, replacing it with humility. I had set them free, but in truth, it was they who had freed me from blindness. On one quiet night, the elder sister spoke again. Her words were simple but carried the depth of truth. Freedom is not given, it is lived. I nodded, feeling the truth settle into my bones. She was right. My act in the town square had not created freedom, it had only recognized what was already theirs. In that recognition, we had found something rare, a bond not of master and servant, but of equals, of shared humanity. In the silence of that desert night, under stars older than nations, three paths had indeed become one.